Just got done with supper, poked the head out the window, and here's a swarm coming in again. Hit a trap up here. We saw them scouting for a few days, and they just started to show up. Tons of bees. Just barely getting started. A few bees are finding the trap there. We call it a trap, it's more of a nest box. The scout bees notice it as a really good potential spot for a colony to live. So they'll bring the swarm here, and we get free bees out of the deal. Scout bees are telling everybody where it is. Wow, that's incredible. The scout bees can only guide the swarm so far. They get to this area, and then the scout bees go down to the trap. They're the only ones that know where it actually is, and they'll start putting off a locator pheromone to get the bees the rest of the way to the new home. Up until this point, the scout bees guided the swarm by flying over top of it. What happens is the swarm will fly low to the ground, and the scout bees fly really quick above the swarm, so they're outlined against the sky, and the bees can look up and follow that bee line of the really fast flying scouts. And they follow that line. The scouts will fly really quick on top till they get in front of the swarm, then they drop down underneath and fly back under it, and then loop up around until they get to the spot that they picked out. And then, like I said, they can only get so far, and then these bees don't have anybody to follow anymore, so they stop flying and start milling around, and then they'll stay that way until they start to smell the locator pheromone down here at the trap. If we go over here, you'll start to notice more and more bees down here. A couple of these you'll see with their butts up in the air. These are scout bees fanning a locator pheromone. They have a gland way down at the end of their abdomen called a nasonov gland that secretes this locator pheromone that smells like lemons. And they stand there and they fan their wings to get that smell up in the air, and then that'll guide the rest of the bees into the trap. So now we're a couple minutes in, and we're starting to get more and more bees right at the branches here, and more at the trap. And it won't be long now until there's a beard of bees hanging down here. Really cool to be part of. Luckily my neighbors are pretty chill with this. These scout bees, they're homeless right now, or the swarm of bees, they're homeless, so they don't have a defense mechanism, or they're not as keyed up on a defense mechanism. They don't have a place to defend, so they're really docile. They've also fed up on lots of honey before they left the parent colony, which makes them physically less capable of stinging as well. So they're fat and happy and ready to find the new home, ready to start a new colony. What happens here is there's another beehive somewhere that has outgrown its space. We'll call that the parent colony. And likely what's happened here is the queen of that old colony that outgrew its space, and about half to 3/4 of the workers have left that colony. Before they leave, they'll start raising a new batch of queens, that way the existing colony can still live. But the old queen and a bunch of the workers leave. It's called a swarm. They'll hang in a tree and send out scout bees to find suitable nesting sites like this one. And then the scout bees will guide the swarm here, and they'll take over this spot as a new colony. The queen lays eggs, And that's how you produce individual workers. That's how the actual bee organism reproduces. But then that only gets you more bees. That doesn't get you more beehives. To get more beehives, somehow you need to take one colony and turn it into two. And that's what swarming does. That old queen leaves, the old colony raises a new queen, and now you have two colonies started. And these bees will grow really, really quickly. This colony will, I should say. These swarms are incredibly keyed up on being able to produce wax and grow quickly. We'll take these bees, after they've all settled in, we'll take this trap down and go put it into our regular beekeeping operation and hopefully make some honey off of them this year yet. But back up again. We go back to where we were before and look up. Might not show up so well on video, but there's a lot less bees up there and a lot of bees in under the tree now. If we're really lucky, we'll get to see the queen run in, but it can be hard to pick her out from the crowd, as you might imagine. Yeah, these bees are very, very gentle. Most of the time. At least up here in the north they are. Sometimes down south you can have Africanized bees that are more aggressive, but especially up here in the north, we're in south central PA, the bee swarms are fairly safe to interact with. Kind of getting covered up in bees standing here. As long as you move slowly and don't crush any, you're typically fine. I've never been stung by a swarm from a bee I didn't step on or otherwise instigate into it. The noise is incredible. You see more and more bees doing the locator pheromone. As more and more find it, they'll continue to pile on, and kind of the rate of moving in grows exponentially almost. Lots of things about bees grow exponentially, including moving into a new colony here. Here we see the beginnings of a beard starting to form, where the bees are landing faster than they can pile into the entrance. And so that'll build a beard of bees there that'll continue to grow as the colony lands, or as the swarm lands, I should say. And should eventually dissipate as they all start to land and move into the colony, and move into the swarm trap, that is. See if we can pick out a drone here. All the bees you see here, these are all workers. Just about all of them. They're female bees. Workers do most of the tasks of the hive. The only thing they don't do is produce more bees. That's the job of the queen. There's only one queen per hive. And this swarm's probably 10 or 15,000 workers strong. And we also see, here's one. Here's a drone that came with. Drones are male bees. They can't sting. They're kind of cute, actually. Focus here. Oh, lost him. Grab another one. If I can find one. The drones are built very differently. You can see his big bulbous eyes on the top of his head. That's because honeybees mate on the fly. So the drone will fly out and mate with the queen while she is flying in the air. These eyes are designed so that he can look up and spot her against the sky as they are flying in the air, and they'll mate on the fly, and that's the end of his life. So yeah, they're kind of cute, kind of cuddly, very specially designed for what they do. Their only purpose to the colony is to propagate its genetics. This colony can make its genetics spread either by swarming like this, which it can do once or maybe twice a year, or it can spread its genetics by producing a lot of drones and maybe mating with hundreds of different queens in the area throughout the year. So that's why it makes sense for them to make drones, even though they have no immediate benefit to that colony. It also helps to spread their genetics, and it also helps all of the neighbor hives to be strong. And if nobody made the drones, then there'd be nobody to mate with the queens, and the whole system would collapse. See these bees just piling in the entrance? Lots of them landing on the tree this time. If you're interested in what we do with the swarm traps, we do have a video on our channel about that covers the swarm trap design. There's also one about building a swarm trap, and then a video where we go in depth about what we do with swarm trapping and when and how we handle these colonies. This is actually quite a sizable swarm. And now we're 10 minutes in since this swarm showed up. And if I back up again and look up where we have been looking, just about silent. It does not take them long to settle in. And now the activity is truly focused around the box. And as we walk in, the sound will get louder and louder, and then almost terrifying. Now, like I said, these bees, swarming bees, are very gentle. If you've ever seen pictures of someone wearing a bee beard, those are swarming bees. They're very gentle. You can do fun things with them. So, for example, I'm not concerned at all about getting a handful of these bees. As long as I move slowly and don't pinch any of them, they got other things to do. They don't want to sting me today. Here's a queen. You see her there? See if we can grab her. Alright, so this is the queen bee. Awesome. I'll pull this back and we can look at her a little bit. She's got a much longer abdomen on her. She also has some other defining characteristics that make her easy to pick out. It's going to be hard to do this one-handed. But you see these bees are very interested in my hand all of a sudden. So she's the main point of the whole show here. Finding queens is not a trait or not a skill you can teach. It's just a matter of looking at thousands and thousands of bees and knowing what to pick out. And you look at enough workers, and then it's very easy to see when something doesn't act quite like a worker. Find it. So to help these bees move into the box, we're going to put her in the entrance. If she stays outside of the box, then the whole swarm will leave the box as well. They're able to find her by smelling her, by her pheromones. So if she leaves the box, then the whole swarm will move out again and find her, and then they'll try to find another home again. So if I put her in the box, her pheromones will now be in there, and the bees should start running in very quickly. I think you'll see a dramatic shift here in a second as these bees all start to run down in, whereas before they were kind of hanging on the trees, hanging on the box. We should start to see rivers of bees start to flood into there because they can smell her pheromones. It's amazing how well these bees can smell. So they've done experiments where they take a swarm and they cage the queen, where the queen can't fly away. The rest of the swarm doesn't know that this queen is caged, so they'll go find a place to move into, and the swarm will take off, and the queen of course can't go with them, and the swarm will only make it a short distance before they realize from that lack of pheromones of the queen that she's not there, and they'll turn around and go back and cluster back on the queen's cage and try again. So while these bees are flying, they're almost constantly in communication almost with their queen, making sure that she's still here. They're able to smell her that well. If you think about it, bees have to find a way to communicate that works in a dark, hollow cavity like this. Anything sight-based won't work very well, so they work off of pheromones mostly, and vibrations and dancing. It's fascinating really how they're able to do all this in a dark, tight little chamber. Really lucky to find that queen. This swarm, judging by the size of it, is what we would call a prime swarm. In my example I gave earlier, where a colony outgrows its space and the old queen leaves, if it's a queen, a mated queen that was laying in the old colony, we're going to call that a prime swarm. So if the old queen that was laying and was the matriarch of that hive leaves, that's the prime swarm, the first swarm. Like I said earlier, when they do that, before they leave, they'll raise a new batch of queens. And what can happen is if the colony is still too full after the first swarm leaves, when that first queen emerges from her cell, just done pupating, sometimes they'll leave with that queen, or maybe multiple queens that hatch at the same time, and throw a secondary swarm, or an after swarm, and they can after swarm many times until they run out of bees. But judging from the size of this one, it almost has to be a prime swarm, which means out of these 10 or 15,000 bees, we found the one that looks a little different than the rest. And we put her in the box, and that should pretty much guarantee that we'll collect the rest of this swarm. So back in the parent colony, the colony that created this swarm, right now there's queen bees that are just about ready to emerge from the cocoons essentially. We'd call it a queen cell, where the queen pupates in. That's called not a cocoon, but it's a queen cell. Those queens are about to emerge, and what will happen, since they raise multiple queens, they will either throw after swarms until they run out of queens or bees, or more commonly what will happen is the first queen that hatches, of the many that they raised at once, she will go around and kill all of her sisters that have not yet emerged. It's kind of brutal. The first thing she does is turn around and she'll destroy all the other queens, and then after all the other queens have been killed, she will go and mate on the fly with drones, like we pointed out, ideally from a different colony, and then she'll fly back to her original hive, her original colony, and she'll take over being the queen of that hive at that point. It's kind of a high-risk scenario for them all, but that's the only way you end up with more colonies of bees like this. This is filling in the crack there. It's definitely a fairly sizable swarm here. But yeah, these are... Don't try this at home unless you're willing to be stung, because this is high risk, kind of. I mean, just grabbing a handful of bees, you might get stung. But I have not been stung doing this, ever. You grab a handful of bees. As you do, just grab a handful of bees. And they're quite okay with the whole situation. And to get them off, we'll just do a quick flick. Good to go. So here I just accidentally pinched a bee on my arm. We'll see if she lets me go or not. She's got a stinger stuck in me. And we'll see her pull that out, likely. She's probably going to commit to this sting. Sometimes they can back out of it, where they kind of sting, but then they don't fully sting. And they're able to pull it out without yanking out their stinger. We'll see if this one manages it. Normally what happens is they'll, when they sting like this, they will pull away and their stinger pops out, and then the stinger is actually an independent organ that'll start to pump venom into you. Now this one, she only half committed to that sting because I bent my arm on her and she was able to pull out her stinger, and she'll be able to fly off now. But more commonly than not, you'll get a sting. The stinger actually has 3 parts. There's a shovel underneath and then 2 barbs on top, essentially. The shovel is just sharp, it's just there to dig down in, and then the barbs on top have these, like I said, barbs sticking back, and they'll start to pulsate, cycle like this. So the stinger will dig itself deeper into you as the venom sac on the end pumps out all the venom into you. So the sooner you get it out of you, the less bad of a sting you'll get. But if you leave it in there, it'll dig deeper and deeper and deeper until it finally runs out of venom. So what you want to do, because it's a venom sac on the end of a stinger, rather than pinching it and pulling it out, you just want to scratch it off, and that'll prevent you from squeezing the venom sac down into yourself. So this is definitely a large swarm. They're constantly running in there. Really happy to have them. Unfortunately for these guys, the mortality rate for swarms is incredibly high. We catch a lot of swarms, and we see 75 to 80% mortality till the end of the first winter. They really have the odds stacked against them. But when you're dealing, that sounds bad, but when you think about it, if the survival rate was any higher, there would be bees everywhere all the time. So only the best survive, only the best propagate and continue to make more colonies, and that's why we're not totally overrun with them. I guess if you're down south, you might be totally overrun with bees. Up here in the north, we don't have very many wild colonies. We definitely have some, but mostly it's managed bees, and we don't have issues with them getting into our houses and floorboards and whatnot. This swarm might take another 15 or 20 minutes to settle in. They'll continue to fly in and funnel in. And then later tonight, after everyone's in the house for the evening, we'll come through and pop this trap off of the tree and take it elsewhere and hang another trap here to catch another swarm tomorrow. Get you a real close up here. Probably stop the video there. It's just going to be more of the same here. They won't fully settle down until, like I said, after dark tonight. But between now and then, all these bees will funnel up in, and they'll start to build out that colony in there. So, hope you all enjoyed. Learned a little bit about bees. Sorry for dumping all of my bee facts on you. I'm kind of known by everyone who knows me as the bee guy. If you let me talk about bees, I'll talk about bees as long as as you let me. So as you're here watching the video, I'm going to teach you a little bit about the amazing, fascinating science of bees. And we really only scratched the surface. We only talked about swarm dynamics. There's a lot more to learn about bees and all the dynamics that go on within a colony and how to manage them. They really are fascinating. Hope you enjoyed.